So we want to discuss about what is happening with security in Nyanza. And of course, that is just a snippet of what is happening there with the Migingo dilemma as well. And we know the gentle hints also dropped recently by the Cabinet Secretary Foreign Affairs, Monica Juma, to her Ugandan counterpart, Henry Okello Oriem, have fallen on deaf ears following the arrest in mid-July of several Kenyan security officers by Ugandan soldiers who are patrolling on the island of Migingo on Lake Victoria. She was left with no choice but to travel to Kampala in late June in the hope of avoiding a ratcheting up of tensions, but to no avail. And we know the 10,800 meters squared rock, which boasts a record population density of 36,000 inhabitants per square kilometers, has been the subject of territorial disputes between the two countries for 10 good years, and more for the control of its fishing stocks than for the governance of its 400 citizens. The suspected presence also of oil in the lake bed has further spiced up the controversy, which had seemingly been resolved on several occasions following repeated incidents in recent weeks affecting Kenya fishermen from the island. The politicians also have lost no time going on the offensive. And of course, we've heard from Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i directly threatening Kampala, while the National Assembly Majority Leader, also Eden Duale, has called for Kenya Army to be deployed on the island. The opposition Senator James Orengo has called for the case to be taken to the International Court of Justice. So this is where we are with Migingo, and I think this has been for the longest time a very controversial island so far. But could maybe also the presence of oil on Lake Victoria be also some of the predisposing factor that we can see this tension rising in Migingo Island? Let's begin with Professor Naomi Damba.
Let's first of all talk about international principle and factors, historical factors associated with Migingo Island before we talk about socio-economic factors which is impacting the island right now. The international principle, which is called ut possidetis, is calling for the newly formed sovereign state should have the same border that reflect the preceding pre-independent. And if we look at the situation in Migingo, you will find that Migingo is within the Kenyan territorial right, according to John Donaldson, who is a research associate with the British Boundary Research Team. And this was drawn in 1926. So these are factors that are laid. Now, when you look at issue of socio-economic factors, Kenya owns 6% of Lake Victoria, but dominate Nile perch harvest. We harvest more or less more than 50% of the Nile perch. Uganda owns 43% of the lake, but harvests less than that. And there is also, as you just indicated, discovery of oil in this area. Now, what we need to do is to be very cautious and not trigger happy, because we cannot pretend to be an East African community moving toward free trade and all that kind of thing, and at the same time introduce or militarize Lake Victoria. This is the last thing that we need to think about. The emphasis on stability need to be there. Finality of our borders need to be there, and respect for historical territorial integrity, because it will take us nowhere when we begin redefining the colonial borders between Somalia and Kenya, between Uganda and Kenya, and between Tanzania and Kenya. It will take us nowhere. And the sanity has to prevail on both the leadership in Uganda and the leadership in Kenya. And what we need to do is to introduce marine patrol to stop illegal trade, that is happening in the area. This ought to be the focus of both Kenya and Uganda, and not go on the side source that I'm seeing that can bring some really serious consequences.
Let's hear from Migingo.
I mean, I think Prof has done it very comprehensively. Let me make it a bit simpler for us. There are two basic problems here. The first is that fish don't comply with international law. That's right. Right? They don't need visas. Right? They don't need visas or work permits or other kinds of immigration details. The second problem is that colonials didn't know how to draw maps. So that the way they drew the colonial boundaries was simply straight lines. Right? So these are the two fundamental problems with regards to Migingo and a lot of the border disputes that we see across Africa, not just in East Africa. I think there are two concerns I have at this moment. First of all is that headline, which is the talks are over. Because once talks and dialogue break down, the only thing left is to man up, as they say. But actually what it means is to militarize the area. And I think that would be disastrous, I think, for both of our countries. The thing that I think needs to be looked at again, and there are different ways that they can resolve this. They can resolve this in terms of international dispute arbitration. That's one option. The second one is bilateral talks between the two countries. And the third one is really to return to what seemed to have worked for quite a bit of time, but perhaps now has become stressed by the huge population and the overfishing that's happening, which is to look at the power of the beach management units. These were the units that were set up by the fisher folk themselves to essentially arbitrate between, or to regulate and limit the number of boats, to ensure that the boats were licensed so that you didn't have people just coming into the area. And then secondly also to make sure that there was a quota that was given in terms of catch. So you actually regulate the fishing in that area. And it is what do you call it? It is basically integrated into the communities, the fishing communities of that area. So there are three levels at which they could come at this problem if it has reached this point.
All right, let's hear from Erastus Manja.
The founders of the OAU and now AU saw this problem coming. And that's why in the OAU treaty, there was a clear indication in that treaty that we respect the boundaries as inherited from the colonial. And that still reigns. In fact, if you look at the number of disputes on boundaries in Africa, there are quite many. You've just seen one that is coming to an end between Ethiopia and Eritrea. You have seen one in Nigeria, Cameroon, you can name it. There is Senegal and Gambia, all over. And the principle, as outlined by my two colleagues, there are international statutes that help. There is a dictum which says, good accounting makes good friends. And here, if we don't go through this route, that we can agree to talk and then go for the method of conflict or potential conflict resolution, we are setting ourselves to a crisis that will destroy all of us. And there is no one going to win here because we'll all be lose-lose. And so to me, it's very clear, and as it has been indicated, in fact, one of the most ridiculous definitions of rules of origin of fish is the person who fishes, or the boat that is used. It is not where the fish grew up.
Who catches them first?
Exactly. And that's why you find countries like Spain export a lot of fish when they don't have a place where to fish. They come and fish here, but the Spanish boat, then that means Spanish fish. I don't think we should go through the direction of saying, oh, who has fished too much fish, because fish move depending on where they breed and the temperatures and the rest. What is important is, let's sit down, look at the boundary. If we don't agree, let's go to international, as proposed by Senator Rengo. Otherwise, we are setting ourselves to a crisis that we'll all live to regret.
You just mentioned about the map, and I think the British High Commission has actually revealed the maps, and the maps really show that Migingo falls within the Kenyan territory.
Yes.
So then, what is the contention if it is clearly, demarcated from the boundary? I fail to understand. Any of you?
We seem to be in a state where nowadays logic doesn't seem to be the place where we operate from. And in the case of Migingo, if these differences keep being magnified, a conflict is actually going to arise. It is actually on Kenya's territory. There is no debate about that. And the fact that someone wants to bring a debate on the issue resulting to ways that hurt Kenyans, it's almost a provocation. So for me, I would want to say, let's not fall for it, because you send the KDF to Migingo, they are not going there to have a conversation. Let us be clear. And yet we know that there will not be any good outcome for either party. What we also need to recognize about such a small space with so many people is that they don't live as Kenyans or Ugandans. I'm sure people there are sharing the utilities, but they are also sharing each other. How can we therefore exploit the common bonds between the Ugandans and the Kenyans there? Every community at a district level has a security committee. This issue is now high level because at the bottom it could not have been solved. So we can't ask the people at the bottom to solve it. But we can involve the people who are on the ground to contribute towards the solution of this problem. I personally would not want to see it go military. There is no good that can come out of that. And I think we just need to be able to sit down and have a conversation. And if a conversation cannot be able to work, we must have another conversation. And if that fails, we have another conversation.
Right.
Dibal, Kenya's patience must have run out on this. I think we know clearly which country is the one that is stoking fires here. Kenya is the only country in East Africa that has a navy, and a powerful navy at that. I don't think Uganda wants to deal with that. This is such a tiny problem. I don't understand why Uganda is not, seeing a sense. Places like Gibraltar in Spain, which I think is British, but is in Spain, but you have the runway. Actually, when you're landing in Gibraltar, the plane will land in Gibraltar, but the runway goes into Spain and then comes back. But they have ways of sharing revenue and whatever economic things that come out of that kind of arrangement. This is a socio-economic issue. Shouldn't even be or should not be escalated to a much bigger thing, and I think that's where perhaps Uganda is trying to stoke the fires. And the fact that these are East African countries, we shouldn't really be talking about borders as such. Territoriality and the sovereignty of territory must be respected. Uganda should respect Kenya's territorial integrity, and should deal with these issues. As Ambassador Mwencha is saying, there are so many border issues. In fact, virtually all countries in Africa have one border issue or the other, whether it's Egypt and Sudan, Sudan and South Sudan, Sudan and Kenya, going all the way to South Africa. And we need statesmanship. This young man, President of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, went and met Afewerki and said, Badme, you want Badme? Take it. But let me have Massawa port. Let me have my goods go through Massawa port. And it helps both countries. It's that statesmanship that we need to see. I don't see that coming from Uganda.
Mm-hmm. So what is the way forward? Should it be taken to the international courts of justice, as is being fronted by Senator James Orengo?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It would be it won't serve Kenya's interest, and I believe this is the decision. This is why Kenya hasn't even bothered to take its navy to Lake Victoria. It won't serve Kenya's interest to deal with that issue militarily. Certainly not Uganda's at all. Uganda does not want to confront Kenya on that in a military sense. It's definitely going to lose, and Kenya has to be that big brother and try and counsel Uganda and say, let's resolve this, or we go to the international courts.
All right. Let's move on and to see you also, unless you have anything to say. I can see Noah Dama is turning at the leash.
No, what I want to say is, you will recall Idi Amin wanted half of Kenya.
That's right.
And Jomo Kenyatta made a stand, and Idi Amin calmed down. So, there is no question about it. We can go to international court and everything, but the people in Migingo Island live their daily life.
Yep.
They fish, they live their daily life, and they're both Ugandans and Kenya.
Yeah.
That is the level we need to come into.
Yeah.
See sense.
All right. Maybe we should consider dual citizenship.
It doesn't matter.
Including the fish.
There is,
That should be the happy medium.
No citizenship.
No citizenship.
That's cool.
All right.
I think whatever happens, there has to be a new way of doing things. Maybe that's what they need, a new script.
A new script. Right. Let's see what we...